Doesn't that look fun right there? You want to be a part of that, don't you? Last year was a lot of fun. It was our first annual, so that makes this our second annual. I don't know if you really get to do a first annual, because that's just doing it. That's just a one-time thing. So that was our first go at that. Publix loved it. People loved it. It was a lot of fun, and I hope that you'll join us this year as we go and we do that, because what happens is after the holidays, food banks are empty. They've been depleted, and so we want to be there for after the holidays to make sure they get food so that they can start the new year. There's still need after the new year. It doesn't go away, and we want to make sure that they're fully stocked to go into 2020. So love for you to be there. It'll be a lot of fun. And I hope that you had a great Thanksgiving this last week. I hope you had a great time with family and with friends and just being able to sit around tables and share stories and have conversation, have way too much food, watch football, eat more food. Is anybody on like day 3 of turkey? Like anybody else doing what I'm doing, where I'm on apparently just a strict turkey diet and everything I eat has turkey in it? Last night, guys, this is no exaggeration. I found myself making turkey nachos. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It wasn't good either, though. I wouldn't recommend it, but I tried it. I mean, that's where I was at. I was like trying to find new ways to make turkey recipes. But I hope you had a good time with your family. I know for me, it's a time where I end up on the phone some with some family that's far away, if you're like that. If you're some of those people who came down to Florida to get away from your family, and then you have to make those phone calls, whatever it is, whatever your family situation. And so I had some phone calls I had to make, and I was talking to my brother, and yesterday, we were kind of catching up a little bit, and we talked on Thanksgiving. We talked yesterday for a little bit. We were talking about some plans we have for Christmas this year, and road trips that we're gonna have to take to get to Christmas and different things. And it reminded me, and we started talking about this road trip that he and I took a couple years ago together. Some of you know about this. A few years ago, my brother and I road tripped from Washington State, from north of Seattle, all the way down here to Florida. We did a few days, just us in a U-Haul, which is not recommended, guys. It's not a fun trip. You may love your brother, you may love your family members, but there's only 2 seats in a U-Haul, and there's not a lot of ventilation or ways to get out of talking to each other or being near each other or smelling each other. And by the end of it, we were closer than we've ever been, but also more willing to get away from each other than we've ever been. And so he had planned this meticulous trip across the country from Washington to Florida, and he had planned this trip around barbecue restaurants. And I'm not joking. Every stop was a different barbecue restaurant he wanted to eat at. And we ate at different barbecue restaurants all along the way. And so we ate at all these barbecue places. It was a meticulous trip. I mean, everything was planned out. Everywhere we hit was exactly on time. We had a schedule, and we didn't sleep a whole lot. We just kept driving through. And when we got here to Florida, we unloaded everything out of the truck, and I went to the U-Haul place to drop off the truck. And I showed up there, and I had the keys in my hand, and they were just closing. And I walked up to the store to give the man the keys, and he looked at me and he said, "We're closed." And I said, "Well, I'm just here to drop off some keys." And he said, "Okay, well, I can just take them, I guess." And he was kind of frustrated with me. And he looked at me, he was like, "I guess I'll just take them." He's like, just give them to me, and what's your last name?" And I looked at him, I said, my last name's Stamper. And he like it was like a jolt, went through him. And he looked up, he goes, "You're Stamper?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're the one that came from Washington, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, that's what he said to me. He goes, "We didn't think you were going to make it." Like it was a life or death trip across this is the Oregon Trail, and we were going to die of dysentery somewhere along the way, or by fording a river. And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, we've lost a couple of family members on the way, but we're here now." And he literally said to me, "Didn't think you were going to make it." He goes, "It's only been 4 days." And I was like, "I know, we're good." And he was like, "I can't believe it." And guys, I don't know if there's a U-Haul Wall of Fame, but I'm pretty sure I'm on it. If there is. I mean, we blew this man's mind by how fast we made it, and apparently just the fact that we made it. But the fact that he heard my name, he knew who I was because of that, and he knew where I had come from because of that name. There's this family name that I have. It's the Stamper name. I'm not really sure where it came from. I've tried to do some of the lineage on my background. I don't really know how we got the name Stamper. Either we were people who literally did postage stamps, or we were people who put out very small fires. We're good at this. I'm not sure which one it is. We have this last name, and because of that last name, because of that, people know where we've been and what's going on. They understand that about you. You have a last name, you have a family name. There's a reason that you're part of a certain family, and it tells people about where you've been and where you're going. Now, this is not unlike other things that happen in our world. We're going to be looking over the next few weeks at the family tree of Jesus. And there's a whole genealogy of Jesus that tells us all these names, and it tells us where Jesus comes from. And it's actually a really important thing to understand the names and where Jesus comes from, what his background is. And by knowing these names, we know more about him. And there's a really interesting, a whole section of paragraphs at the beginning of Matthew chapter 1 that tells us all of these names. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but my family has some weird names in it. There's some odd names. My grandfather, Stamper, his name is Geraldine. But he has a brother, and his brother's name is Harold Jean. So there's Geraldine and Harold Jean, and then they have sisters, and their sisters' names are Ruth, and Ruth married a guy named Carmel. That's his real name. We'll talk more about Carmel through this series. And then their other sister was named Junice. That's a name, apparently. And Junice married a guy named Bud. But Bud's real name is not Bud, it's Zen. And Zen is from Zoe, Kentucky. So Zen from Zoe married Junice, and then Ruth married Carmel, and then they're sisters of Geraldine and Harold Jean. I don't know if it's a train wreck. They're mostly from Kentucky. I don't think you have to say that. I think that's understood. They're from Kentucky. And maybe you have these weird names. Jesus' family has some weird names in it, and all of these names have meaning, though. And so what we're going to do real quick is we're going to read through this account of where Jesus' lineage is mentioned. It's in Matthew chapter 1. It's the very first chapter of the New Testament. This is where it all begins, and this is how Matthew chooses to start his entire gospel. This is how he starts the whole thing, is with this lineage, with this account. This is what it says. It says, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Then it goes into this. It says, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. And then Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. And you all knew that. And then Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon or Salmon. I'm not sure which way you want to pronounce that. He was just known because he was different than everybody else. He always was swimming upstream. And so Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of King David. We're all tracking here, right? We got all these? Don't worry, he's not done. So it says, then David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the father of Abijah. Abijah, the father of Asa. Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat. If you're looking for baby names, here's one. Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram. And Jehoram, the father of Uzziah. Uzziah, the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh. Manasseh, the father of Amon. Amon, the father of Josiah. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. Got this? This is powerful, isn't it? You're like, I'm glad I came to church today. Because this is deep. This is meaningful. I know all of these things, and it's meaningful to me. Then after that, it says, after the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father, it sounds like a Star Wars name, doesn't it? Zadok the father of Achim, Achim the father of Eliadu, Eliud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Matthan, Matthan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, whom was born Jesus and who is called the Christ. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It takes work. Yeah, I don't have it memorized yet. I'm working on it. This seems like the most powerful verse you could memorize. If you're doing memory verses with your kids, start here. Start here. It's deep. So this whole thing is happening, and notice just that last bit right there. Notice that he leaves it off saying that Jacob is the father of Joseph, who is the husband of Mary. It does not say is the father of Jesus. It says that he's the husband of Mary, and Mary is the mother of Jesus, because the father of Jesus is God himself. So there's this whole thing there. But if you notice in that book, in that chapter, there are these sections, and it actually happens in 14 verses at a time. There's 14, 14, and 14 names. It's like 14 generations, 14 generations, 14 generations. Matthew separates them out that way. We'll talk about that more later in the series. But that's actually a really important thing that he does. And he goes through this, and the reason that this is meaningful is Matthew could have chosen any way to start his book. He could have chosen any way to get people to read about Jesus. Like, if we're being honest, I don't know where you would start. Many of us might start with the birth, right? Like, where it's just like, let's start with your life story. My brother-in-law was here in town this last week with his fiance, and that was the first thing that Marie did, is she pulled his fiance into a car. They went for a drive, and she was like, so tell me your entire life story. Don't leave anything out. And this poor girl was like, what is this family I'm marrying into? That's the way Marie operates. You could start with the whole story. Start from the beginning, don't leave anything out. But he starts before the birth of Jesus. You could start with like a really powerful, dramatic Hollywood opening where like Jesus is on the cross and he's getting his hands like nailed into the cross. And then you see this freeze frame and a record scratch, and then all of a sudden Jesus is like, my name's Jesus. You might be wondering how I got on this cross. Well, it all started about 3 years ago, and like go back into his story and have this whole thing that picks up from there. That would be a dramatic opening. It might work, but Matthew doesn't start that way. Matthew starts a very different way. He starts with the genealogy of Jesus. Why would he do this? Why is this the way he chooses to do this? For so many of us, if you're like me, you've skipped this part of the Bible because it's not really that interesting. There's a lot of names. They don't mean much to us, but it meant so much to the Jewish people. The Hebrew culture that Jesus was being born into and that Matthew is writing to, every one of these names had a story attached to it. And they would have known the stories and they would have understood the stories. It would have mattered because it would have told us whose Jesus was and who Jesus was. Every story was a building block of God's faithfulness. Every story mattered, and therefore when they heard all these names, it all made sense. What happened was after the exile, so if you pay attention to the Bible, what happens is, again, there's kind of this moment where the kingdoms are united, Israel comes together, and then there's this King David, he has this united kingdom of Israel, it's all one big kingdom, it's doing really well. Then his son, Solomon, splits the kingdom between his two sons before he dies. There's Rehoboam and there's Jeroboam. They split the two kingdoms, and it becomes Israel and Judah. And Israel falls to the Assyrians early on in 722 BC. They fall to the Assyrians, and then the south kingdom falls later on to the Babylonians in 597 BC. But then both kingdoms are taken over by Persia. When Persia comes in 532 BC, they're kinder. And so they let the Israelites go back to their homelands. They let the Israelites go back and build the temple and build the walls. They let them go back to their homelands. And when everybody starts to get back together, can you imagine if you were to split up your entire family and everybody you ever knew? When they all get back together, this matters to them because they're going, wait, whose are you? Where did you come from? Tell me about your lineage. Tell me about your family. Whose are you and who are you? And so that's why this matters so much and why Matthew takes excruciating detail to tell us where Jesus comes from. Because every one of these names has a story, and every story is a building block in the story of God's faithfulness. There's a plan that's been in place, and that's what Matthew's trying to teach us. There's a plan that's been in place for redemption, and it's been around so much longer than you thought. It's been around so much longer than we expected. If we're being honest with ourselves, we have very short-term vision. We see things we're very nearsighted with what we see. We don't see God working all the time. We don't see God's hand in motion all the time. We don't see God doing things around us. We get very fixated on the things that are very near us, and we miss this bigger picture. What Matthew's saying is there's a bigger picture. It's way bigger than you thought. And it goes back thousands of years, and the story of God's faithfulness is not new to you, and it's not new to me, and it's not new in our generation. It has been around for centuries and millennia before us. And so the first person that Jesus, his lineage starts with in this entire thing is not actually with Adam and Eve. It doesn't start there. It starts with a guy named Abraham. If you notice in the very beginning of that chapter, the very first verse says, a record of the genealogy of Jesus, the son of David. And then it begins with the son of Abraham. He's the son of Abraham. Abraham's the first one. He's the first one to start this whole story. And so what we're going to do over the next few weeks, we're going to kind of skip through this. I wish we had time to go through like literally every name, because I tell you, these are fascinating stories as to how we get to Jesus from that person and the tie-ins between Jesus and that person. But we're just going to skip through a few of the big ones. And today we're going to start at the very beginning, because as Julie Andrews says, it's a very good place to start. And so we're going to start at the very beginning with Abraham and look at Abraham's life and see these tie-ins of this story of faithfulness that has been written for thousands of years. Abraham lived about 2,000 years before Jesus. And so we're going to go back about 2,000 years to see this story of Abraham and see the parallels and the tie-ins it has to Jesus and when Jesus arrives on the scene. So, if you have a Bible or a phone or whatever, you're welcome to turn with me, or it'll be on the screens here. We're going to be in Genesis. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 12. This is where Abraham kind of arrives on the scene. Genesis chapter 12, it says right at the beginning of Genesis 12, it says, "The Lord said to Abram, leave your people and your father's household and go to the land I will show you." Now this is a weird thing that's about to happen. God is telling Abram to leave everything he knows. First of all, let's just get one thing out of the way. Abram, the name Abram means exalted father. Exalted father. This is the name you want to call this would be the name you'd write on like a Father's Day card. This is Abram, the exalted father. And it says to Abram, the Lord shows up, and Abram kind of shows up out of nowhere. And it just says that he says to leave your country, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. This is radical. This is a big deal. And God says, I want you to leave. And it says, I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will bless your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This is called a covenant. This is when God comes in and says, I'm going to make a deal with you, Abraham. Abram, you're my guy, and I'm going to make a deal with you. And he says, you have to leave your country. You have to go away from here for these things to happen. And it says right after that in verse 4, so Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran, and he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. So he takes everything he's accumulated and he sets out from there. Notice that he's 75 years old. Now Abram, both names work for him. Abram is 75 years old. He's going to live to be 175. So he is a little bit like he's a little past, like he's in the middle age section of things. Just so you know, I was told yesterday that there was this like young adults gathering, and like that was gonna be really fun. And Janessa asked me if I wanted to go, and I said I don't think I should. And then she said, well, she kind of kindly called me middle-aged, and it hurt a little bit. I didn't cry because I'm too old and I'm past it. I'm mature now because I'm middle-aged. So Abram's like my age, like 1,000. He's super old. He's on his deathbed, basically. He's 75 years old, and the Lord shows up to him and says, Abram, you have to leave. Now, here's the thing that's happening right here. In the entire Bible, if you pay attention again through the genealogy, follow me for just a second. In the genealogy of the Bible, Abram is 19th from Adam. So from the lineage we have, if you count generations, he's 19th from Adam. And what that means, here's just the only point I'm trying to make with this, is the reason we don't see many of those other people, we don't see their stories. Really, the whole thing begins with Abraham. And the reason it all begins with Abraham is because those other stories were really, really either boring or non-existent. Here's what the typical philosophy of the day was. In Abraham's day, there was a belief. See, we believe in America and in westernized culture, we believe in a linear fashion of life. We will start here and we will get to a better situation, and that situation will get a little bit better and a little bit better, and we will move our whole civilization, all of our progress will move from what it was to what it's going to be. Does that make sense? We kind of move along with it. Maybe it's technology, maybe it's progress, maybe it's urbanization or civilizations. We move from here and say, this is our starting line, and we start to move towards a bigger and better and grander vision. And we start moving towards this thing with this belief that there is something better down the road. That when we get to that more preferable future, that's what we're after. And our culture believes in this, our society believes in this. Again, technology, we believe in this, that we have started here and we're moving to a better place. That may or may not be true, but in the Hebrew culture at this time, the belief was not that you moved from somewhere to somewhere else. The belief was that everything was a cycle. Everything was a cycle. Everything just started here, and by the time you died, it was right back where it began. Nothing moved forward. There was no progress. The goal was to stay put over and over and over again. It's not till God shows up and says, no, you're not staying there anymore. You have somewhere else to go. And here's the thing that I see with us. If we're looking at ourselves as Abram and understanding Abram's story, the truth is I see this with many of us doing the same exact thing. I sit with people, I talk to people who have maybe these moments of disappointment. Maybe they have moments of despair. Maybe they have moments of disease, of divorce, of whatever it is. And we hit that moment, and then we think, this is all there is. This is the rest of my life. This is all there is. It's not going to get better. It's only going to be this forever. This is the new reality that I found myself in, and it never will go better than this. It will never get bigger than this. All I have is what I am right now, and I'm stuck with this forever. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been in a spot where something has happened to you? You could have lost a job, lost a business, lost a friend, lost whatever the thing is, and there's a moment where you suddenly feel like this is it. And this is all it's ever going to be. It's never going to get better than this. I'm never going to get through this. This is my way of life now. And I'm just walking around wounded. I'm walking around knowing that this is broken and it's never going to get fixed. Have you ever been in that spot? I've sat with so many people who are going through these things, and it just feels like suddenly they're in this spot where they're like, I guess this is it. I'm just going to keep this cycle going. But see, God begins in this moment with Abraham. He begins a covenant where he says, no, this isn't all there is. Yes, this world's broken. Yes, there's things that are bad. Yes, there's things that are going to hurt. But I have a plan. And redemption is going to happen, but it's going to require you to start moving towards something else. You're going to have to leave this behind. You're going to have to leave that pain behind. You're going to have to leave those things in the past. You're going to have to start to say, no, that's what's behind me, not what's in front of me. And you're going to have to move forward in faithfulness. And you're going to have to move towards this plan of redemption that I've set in motion. And he makes this deal with Abraham, and he says, I'm going to bless you and make you not just a blessed person, but I'm going to make you a blessing to everyone. This is actually our first foreshadowing we see of like Jesus, really. Is that through you, Abraham, we're going to see redemption, not just for you and your family, not just for the people around you, but for everyone. But notice what happens here. He tells Abram he's going to be this great nation leader. He's going to take over this nation. But notice what it says that he leaves and he goes with. What does he have to his name? It says that he has his wife, Sarai, and his nephew, Lot. And then it says all the possessions that he got and all the people, which means servants. But at the end of the day, do you notice what he's missing? He has no family. He has no kids. He has nobody, like he has Sarai, but he doesn't have any children. And at this moment, to run a nation, you're going to need some kids. Like you're going to need more people than that. I grew up in Wyoming for a number of years, and if you've ever been to Wyoming, why have you? There's not a lot of humans. Like there's not people. There's antelope, a lot of antelope, not a lot of human people. And so there were towns, I kid you not, they would put populations on every sign of every town, which was very weird because why are we counting these little towns? And secondly, it's so sad that you have towns so small that you could count them. Like, I mean, they would change the signs as families moved in and out. I'm not kidding. And there was one family, or one sign we would drive by all the time. It was called Johnson City, and it said population 10. And it was because mom and dad had 8 kids, and they started a city council because they had 10 people, and that was enough to have a city council, and that was Johnson City because they were the Johnson family. That's all you need. So 8 kids, and you can have your own town in Wyoming, apparently. And he doesn't have a family under him. He doesn't have people. This is what God said. Like, he's saying, I want you to go do this, but he's missing some of the key ingredients to actually doing this. If God's going to make him a nation, he needs more people. He needs heirs. He needs people under him. He doesn't have that. And so he moves him from place to place. And if you kind of jump over with me real quick, what happens is we pick up in Genesis 15, and it says this: so God makes a covenant with Abraham, and it says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. This is chapter 15, verse 1. It says, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. And saying this is going to be a great reward for you. But Abram said to him, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus. And we don't know anything about Eleazar, but he must have been the worst. And he says, and Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, and it said, this man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And then it says, Abram believed him. He believed him, and the Lord credited to him as righteousness. Abram believes in that this is going to happen. He buys into it. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a spot where you feel like, again, if there's been disappointment or disease or divorce or despair, whatever the thing is, these are real things. But there are moments too where we don't know how we're going to get out of them, and we don't actually trust that there's a plan in place. It says that Abram believed the Lord. Even though it doesn't make sense, he believed the Lord that this was going to happen. And then what he does, and this is very confusing, we're not going to go deep into this, but what he does is in the next paragraphs, Abram then goes and he takes matters into his own hands. And what he does is he then sleeps with one of his servants and has a son with her, forcing God's hand and saying, no, I'll just do it myself. I believe in what you're saying, but let me handle the timing. I believe in your plan, but let me take care of when it's going to happen. A few weeks ago, we were here and we were talking about prayer, and we had a day where we open up the back room, and it's open again today if you want to go pray after service here. And we open up the back room for people to just go pray about things going on in their lives. And I went back and I was praying with some folks, and a few of the people in that room, we were praying, and they were praying for God's timing. They're praying for God's timing. I don't know if you ever prayed for God's timing. It's like the worst thing you can pray for. And we were praying about it, and they were saying, we know what God's called us to do. We know that God has called us to do something. We know exactly what he's called us to do. And they had a clear picture of what God had called them to do. They knew what it was. They just didn't know when it was. And they were going, so do we just force it? That's what the question was. Do we just force it? Do we just make it happen? Do we just get out there and just do it instead and not wait on God? Is he just making us go for it and get it done? And the answer I had to have, I mean, it's a hard question to ask. It's a hard question to answer. But I don't know if you've ever been in this spot. For me, one of the hardest things that I've ever learned about understanding and following this plan of redemption that God set in front of us is that many times God will tell us what he's going to do. Very few times does he tell us when he's going to do it. Very few times does he tell us when he's going to do something. He will give us big visions and pictures and ideas of what he's going to do. It may be for your family. He's given you a picture of what your family's going to look like. It may be for your business. He's given you a picture of what it's going to look like. It may be for your friends, for your job, for whatever it is, for your life, what your plan is going to look like. He may have given you those things. The hard part is he very seldomly gives you a timeline to go along with it. In fact, if you look at the Bible, if you look at the entire understanding of the Bible, God almost never tells people when things will happen. He always tells them what will happen, but very seldomly does he say when. Even when it comes to the beginning, when we have him creating the world, and then all of a sudden there's these Israelites who are in slavery, he really doesn't tell us, I'm going to wait 400 years and then I'm going to come rescue them. He just decides now it's time to do that. Or like right now, what we're seeing with Abram, he doesn't tell Abram when this whole thing's going to happen. He just says, it will happen, but trust me on my timing. There may be things in your life that you're waiting on that you don't know. There's things throughout the Bible. He doesn't tell us exactly through all the prophecies of exactly what day Jesus was going to show up, but we knew that he would. And today, we still live in this thing where we don't know when Jesus is coming back, but we know that he's going to. He tells us what a lot. He does not tell us when very often. It's one of the most frustrating things we can learn. And maybe there's things in your life that you're like, I want to force the timeline. I want to make it happen myself. And God's going, no, I want you to wait on my timing. It's one of the hardest things for me. When we planted this church, I remember people would come to me and literally the first question they would ask is, what's your 5-year plan? I'd be like, I have no idea. I can tell you what my plan is because I know things that God has put in place for us. I know things that he has told us beyond a shadow of a doubt. These are things I want you to do. But he has not told us when all of those things are going to happen. I can't put God into my 5-year plan. He's put me into his 5-year plan. It's a very hard thing for us to learn. And Abram forces it, and he has a son with a servant, and his name is Ishmael. If you're familiar at all with Islam, this is where Islam traces all of its roots back to, is to Abram and Abraham, but through Ishmael, not through Isaac, who will be the lineage of Jesus. They trace it all the way back to Ishmael. In fact, almost every major world religion does trace itself back to Abraham at some point. But he has this other son, and he cares for the son. He keeps the son around, but it is not his flesh and blood. It's not with his wife, Sarah. And then so if you skip through just real quick with me into chapter 17, it says this: when Abram was 99 years old, chapter 17, verse 1. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram's 99 years old. He's not a young dude. He's like older than me even. And then it says, Abram fell face down, and God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations. What he just did is he changed Abram's name from exalted father to father of many. And if you're counting and you're doing the math, Abram is still the father of 0. This is not an introduction of a new person. This is an insult. It's got to feel so painful for God to say, no, you're now a father of many. He's like, no, I'm not. The thing that you've promised me you haven't done yet, the thing you've told me you haven't come through on yet, and you're telling me now, you're telling me it's going to happen even more than ever. And it says that I will make you fruitful, I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. This covenant, that word covenant right there, this is where the New Testament starts. The Old Testament starts. Last week we looked at where the New Testament starts, which really is in the Last Supper. This is the covenant that begins really the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the covenant that God makes with his people that will carry not just through the Old Testament, but notice it's an everlasting covenant of redemption that he has started here, and it's going to go all the way through to Jesus. And so he's made this covenant with him, and it says, now the Lord was gracious, and this in chapter 21, it says, but finally, after all these things, the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Did you guys catch in any of those other verses a timeline that God had given him? Me neither. But it was the very time. that God had promised. It was the right time. Have you ever had these things where you, if you're older enough like me, if you're like a million now, have you ever had those times where you wanted to force God's hand on something? Or you wanted something to happen so bad, and as you get older, and then you look back at that thing and you're like, I'm so glad that it didn't happen when I wanted it to. I'm so glad that I didn't do it my way. For Marie and I, we wanted to have children, and many of you know that. And there was a time where we forced that. We wanted that so badly. We were forcing God into this thing. We were trying to fight with him. And then now I look back and I look at the time in our lives that we were trying to have this child. And suddenly, right around the time that we were going to have this child, like just right around that time, and we were forcing this whole thing, I changed jobs. We had this ability for Marie to stay home if we were going to have babies. Things were going to get better for our home life. And that's when God gave us a child. It's almost like he knew what was going to happen or something. It's almost like he had a bigger view than what I had. I mean, I'm just saying, theoretically, it's almost like God had a plan in place that was way better than mine. And at the exact right time, he gave him this child. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God promised him. Abraham gave him the name Isaac to the son that Sarah bore him, and his son's name was Isaac, was 8 days old when Abram had circumcised as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Oh, friends, can you imagine being 100 years old and having a newborn? That'd be terrible. Yeah. I'm sure there was happiness, but there's also like a lot of like, oh no. Yeah, that's not actually that encouraging. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. That's why they named him Isaac. Isaac means laughter, or a father's laughter, because they all laughed at God. That's what happened. Abraham and Sarah laughed at God, so they named him Isaac. But that's not the end of the test. And real quick, I just want to walk through this very quickly. Because that's not the end of the test. It's not where Abraham's story ends when it comes to this story of redemption, this story of Jesus. Because the timing's not over. There's one more thing that happens. In chapter 22, it says this. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am. Abraham replied. He's apparently good at talking to God. Here I am. Then God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Hold on to those words. And go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. So this son that you've waited for, this son that is all of your hopes, all of your dreams, the promise, the fruition of everything I've given you, now I want you to take him. And I want you to go kill him. I want you to go put him on an altar and kill him. Early the next morning in verse 3, it says, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants. There's 2 that go with him, 2 servants, and his son Isaac. And when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then he said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he carried himself the fire and the knife. So Isaac is now walking with this wood on his back with his father to a mountain to be sacrificed. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Isaac's a sharp kid. I see a couple things. I see these ingredients. We're missing one important thing. Where is the lamb? Where is this lamb that should be the one who sacrificed? And Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. And when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there, and he arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his own son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." There's a really interesting word in there that we don't have enough time to get into. But do you notice how God says, "Now I know that you fear God"? He's not saying, "I've always known that." He's saying, "Now I know that you fear God." We can talk about that more after service if you have questions about that, because it's fascinating. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram, sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities and their enemies, and through your offsprings all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." You see what happens in this timing? At just the right time, in Abraham's life and 2,000 years later in the book of Matthew, and probably even true of your life today, at just the right time, God sent a son, an only son, who was loved by his father, but he submitted to his father's will as he carried his own death contraption up a mountain to be sacrificed for everyone else. There may be things in your life that you feel like are past redemption. There may be things in your life that you feel like you're just stuck in a circle of the same thing over and over again. There may be things in your life that you think, this is too far gone and I need to force my own way through this because obviously God's plan has failed. No. God's plan is still in motion, and when the time is right, all things will be redeemed. All things will be restored. And maybe today you're in a spot where you're in a season where it feels like that's where you're at. As you're like, when am I going to get through this? Is God going to come through on this? And the answer is, he already has. He's already come through on this. And there are things in your life and in my life that we just need to hand over to him and trust his plan of redemption, because it's going to happen. If we learn anything from the lineage of Jesus, it's that faithfulness has been around since the beginning of time, God's faithfulness. And it's no different then than it was when Jesus was born. It's no different when Jesus was born to what it is now. God's faithfulness is still with you. And his redemption plan is still playing out in your life and in mine. If we'll just let him do it. If we'll just let him take care of the timing. If he'll take care of the what and the when. So today, if you're in that spot, I would encourage you, there's just a room in the back and you're welcome to go back there and pray and just hang out back there. I'll come back there and meet with you and we can pray for a little bit about what's going on in your life, because there might be things that you feel that way about right now. As we begin this Christmas season, we want to look at God's faithfulness. We want to be able to share in this redemption plan that's been around since the beginning of time, and it hasn't stopped now. We want to look at how this all plays out together and how it still plays out in our lives today. So if you would, let's stand together and let's pray. And again, if you'd like to, you're welcome to go back and pray in the room in the back. as we close today. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for this time. We thank you for just this place that we get to come to. We get to learn about you. We get to understand more of your plan for us and your plan in our lives. I pray today, God, that as we go from this place, we would remember that your plan is still playing out. That it's not up to us to force it. It's not up to us to try to make things happen, but it's up to us to have faith that you are working all things out for our good. That your plan of redemption is perfect and it's still happening right now. I pray we wouldn't force anything or get in the way of it, that we would just be able to allow you to do the things that only you can do as we do the things that you've called us to do, which is just to be faithful. That we would just have faith and believe, and you would count that as righteousness towards us. I pray today, God, for the moments that we've strayed from that or we've become unfaithful to that you would remind us that you're still active, you're still moving, that you're still doing things, that you're still here. Even in the moments where it's felt like you've left us, even in the moments where it feels like you've betrayed us or you've left us alone, that we would remind ourselves that your plan is still active and it's still working. That it's still going on in our midst every single day. Praise things to your name. Amen.